welcome to Let's Unravel, and I'm your friend Christina. So hot take, is hot chocolate better than apple cider? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll let you know my thoughts at the end of this episode. So thanks for stopping by. Whether you're a new listener or a friend of the show, I just wanted to say welcome. So we have some exciting new things coming up your way. We are going to be having new segments, new guests. Now, I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now, but it's all true, I swear. And you are not going to want to miss a thing. So make sure you are connecting with us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Let's Unravel Pod. Make sure you're pressing that subscribe button because you are not going to want to miss a thing. And make sure you're following us on Apple Podcast and Spotify. And don't forget, on Spotify, you can be part of our poll on what's your hot take. And the way that you can find that poll is if you press more under the show notes, scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can cast your vote on, is hot chocolate better than apple cider, or is apple cider better than hot chocolate? I'll let you decide that. So let's move into our favorite topic here at Let's Unravel, win of the week. We officially have a Facebook page. So what does this mean for Let's Unravel? This means if there are any clips of the show that you have been wanting to share with your relatives, the wait is over. You can now share with all your relatives on Facebook. But what we are most excited about is we are now going to be having more of a community-based focus at Let's Unravel, which has always been the heart. So now if you have one of the weeks that you want to share and that you want to celebrate, we will have capabilities in which we can post all about whatever wins you're having. And if there's any topics that you'd like to have, it will provide us with an opportunity to also collaborate there as well. So we're really looking forward to expanding our horizons on Facebook. All right, so without any further ado, let's move into our topic of the week. What are we unraveling today? Let's unravel the crippling nature of self-doubt. Now, this has been a concept that I have been thinking about quite a bit recently. It's a universal feeling that we all have, and it's not a typical feeling or emotion that's easy to describe to people. And honestly, I don't always realize I'm even in self-doubt until I'm so far into it. And then it's almost like it's unavoidably just there. Though I've noticed my actions will scream with self-doubt, even though my mind hasn't necessarily caught up to the fact that I'm doubting myself. But a lot of times, the way that I think about these episodes or I think about moments in my life is it's like I will stop and I'll really focus on either a moment in my life, like a time frame, like a year or a season, or I'll focus on like an emotion. And so self-doubt has really been this emotion that I've been focusing on. And it's something that when I start to focus on things, I always like to ask these questions like, what does this look like? And that is something I have become obsessed with recently is what does something look like? So when I'm thinking about like success, what does success look like? And honestly, the most unique thing is everyone's definition of honestly any word is so different. And we've talked about that in other episodes too, where I've had this theory in my life that every person has their own dictionary of words and they have their own meanings of what those words mean. And success is a beautiful representation of what does that mean or what does that look like to you? Because some people it's all about money, some people it's all about family, and the list goes on. And with self-doubt, I feel like everyone can look at it a little different. But for me, when I have been asking myself, what does this look like? What am I doing when I'm functioning in self-doubt? And something that I've started to recognize in me is I'll make a lot of excuses. When I think about self-doubt, I had a lot of self-doubt in my early 20s. Honestly, I had a lot of self-doubt probably from the time I was like a teenager to my 20s. I would always be trying to rationalize why I couldn't necessarily do something or why something wasn't necessarily working out. It wasn't because of a lack of trying, but I think it gets to this point where with self-doubt, it's almost like, well, first of all, with self-doubt, at some point in time, you'll stop trying because you will just start to make so many excuses. And that's something where if I'm going to kind of out myself here, when I was in my early 20s, I think I was like 20, I remember I had wanted to start a blog. That was something I was so passionate about. That was something I really wanted to do. I bought a new laptop and just all these things. And I had decided once I bought the new laptop, I was equipped. I was going to be ready to go. I was going to start blogging and I was going to change my life. And I never did. I went out with some friends. I took some photos, got some headshots, and I was like, I got a new computer. I got headshots. All I need to do is figure out how to post this. And I never did it. I made excuses. And my excuses they were lame. Like, I don't even remember the excuses. They were so lame. Like, oh, I don't want people to see it. Oh no. Like, and it's things like that. And like with self-doubt, you look at everything around you and put more value on everything than you ever do paying attention to you. And what happens is it slowly starts to suffocate you. and you start to drown under the pressure. And within trying to figure out what all of this looks like is I would notice I would either start to avoid or I would hide. That it was one of those things, the people that were like, oh, why didn't you start the blog? And it's like trying to avoid those questions, trying to hide away from it. Or honestly, there would just be these moments where I couldn't decide. I remember there were so many moments where I'd sit down and I'd be like, I'm gonna do this blog. I'm gonna do it today. And then all of a sudden it would be like, how do you want to create the website? And it was like, oh my goodness, a decision overload. I will tell you, it was one decision. But what's so interesting is when you're terrified to put yourself out there, so self-doubt, when you're terrified to do something that you've never done before, the simplest questions can totally throw you off. And then everything starts to snowball. But the biggest thing is you start to just believe, well, I didn't do it today. Why would I do it tomorrow? And then next thing you know, you kind of just throw it in the trash. And that's kind of what ends up happening. And that at least is what ended up happening with my blog is I never ended up doing a blog because I made so many excuses. And then somewhere along the way, I just gave up on it and I threw it out. Then you start to wonder if there's something wrong with you. This is where we need to stop. Or this is where I told myself to stop. Is now I see what self-doubt looks like. The way it looked in my early 20s, it doesn't necessarily look like that now. But something else I've really had to figure out along this way is how am I going to define what self-doubt is? So of course, I have a definition for you here. And so the way self-doubt is defined is a lack of confidence in one's own ability, decisions, and worth leading to uncertainty about your competence. What I find funniest about these definitions is when you read definitions of words, some of them are like, yeah, of course that's what it means. And then there's times when you read words, like for me, when I read the definition of self-doubt, I was just like, all right, I feel like I just got beat up a little bit where it's like lack of confidence. I can't say I ever really thought I lacked confidence, but okay. And then all of a sudden it gets into these other words like your own ability, decisions, worth leading to uncertainty, and just all these things. But then it's like you stop and I do the little like, I'm going to pull you back, Christina. I'm going to look at this from a bigger view. And all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty accurate definition. I mean, granted, that is the definition of the word. But then just because you know the definition of the word and just because you know what it looks like to you, it's really polarizing when you see it in a movie. And so I had been scouring in my mind, what is a movie that perfectly resembles like self-doubt? Like it hits a chord in me that it resembles with self-doubt. So, I went to ChatGPT and, ChatGPT is my new thing. So I asked my questions over there, which I probably shouldn't, and I will stop at some point. And so I was asking ChatGPT, like, what movies best resemble self-doubt? And then they started giving me like these ideas for movies. And I'm like, I am not going to watch those. I'm telling you right now, because some of them are like horror movies. I'm going to tell you right now, I am not a horror movie person. I'm scared of my own shadow. I don't need to watch a horror movie, And then something kind of like funny, like kind of bizarre out of nowhere, all of a sudden I was like, oh, you know what movie I'd really like to watch again? I want to watch the second Spider-Man movie with Tom Holland that's called Far From Home. I'm like, I kind of have a feeling something about self-doubt is in there, but I can't really remember. So maybe if I watch it, that'll work. So I ended up sitting down and I ended up watching Spider-Man Far From Home. And that's the one with Tom Holland and Jake Gyllenhaal and Zendaya. And I think I've been pronouncing her name wrong. I think it's Zendaya, which I am so sorry. I've never been good at pronouncing people's names, which is something that my family knows and makes fun of me for. So great apologies to anybody I've offended with mispronunciations. But when I was watching Spider-Man Far From Home, and the whole emotion I really pulled from that whole movie, it was 100% self-doubt. I mean, it was amazing. So it's supposed to be the movie in the aftermath of after Tony Stark passes away and Captain America and whoever else died in Endgame. And if you haven't seen the movie, I spoiled it for you. I'm sorry. But it was so interesting to see Peter Parker in this movie, Tom Holland, to see him in this moment. And it's funny because in all of the different Avenger movies that Spider-Man has been in, he's a kid, he's in high school, but when he starts to do these things where he's fighting bad guys in outer space and the world's ending and all these things, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, he's back to school, and you're like, how could that kid be afraid of anything? How could that kid have self-doubt? Like, he has done these things that most normal people wouldn't have done. Now, granted, I know, Christina, this is a movie. I get it. But the moment that I think is the most human in this movie is the moment that Peter Parker gets a gift from Tony Stark. And it's basically this moment where Tony was passing the baton to Spider-Man, that it was like, okay, kid, like, I pick you, I choose you. And he writes him a note, and I'm not even going to try to remember what the note said, but it basically was a note acknowledging, like, I pick you, like, you are it. This is for you. But what is so encompassing is how not only does Peter Parker take the gift and he like uses the gift, but then it's almost like he becomes overwhelmed by it. And what does he do? He tries to like kind of like throw it away. He tries to just like give it away to someone else. And that's what he ultimately does. But because it's a Marvel movie, they fall into the wrong hands. And so what happens is he ends up getting played. But why does he get played? He gets played by his own self-doubt. And then it turns into a whole big thing where he's got to track down the bad guy and stop this and stop that. And that is what self-doubt externally looks like. It's the action where it's like it's the giving away. But what Spider-Man Far From Home does, that was my favorite part of capturing this idea. So it shows us what it looks like externally, how Peter Parker is giving away the gift that Tony Stark gave him, which was a pair of sunglasses with all these special capabilities to it. And then obviously the bad guy takes it and he uses it for bad. But then what does he do? The bad guy creates all of these fake simulations and he throws Peter Parker, Spider-Man, through all of them. And you can see very much he's getting beat up and all these different things. Because as much as it's an optical illusion, it's still real. The effects are still happening to him. But what's interesting is this is where it starts to go after him internally, where it's focusing on all of the things that are going on inside. So it's not even a who's stronger, who's bigger, that type of thing. Really, it's going after what does he believe? And that is the thing that Marvel did that they captured so well, is they went after this internal ideology that Spider-Man had, where it was like he lacked some type of self-worth, where he was so focused on either wanting to just be a kid or he was so focused on thinking he wasn't it that it totally screwed up his whole theology. So he didn't hold on to the glasses that were given to him from Tony Stark. He gave them away because he didn't feel like he was deserving of them. And then he was constantly beat up by the bad guy because he couldn't focus on what he was doing. And that is what self-doubt is all about, is it focuses on everything else around you, but it doesn't focus on you because, once again, it's a lack of confidence. But I will say the very worst part isn't the lack of confidence. The worst part is how it's a battle against you in yourself. And because this is a battle against you in yourself, who knows you better than you? Right, it's you. And if you're anything like me, I don't fight fair. No, that sounds horrible. And so in this battle, it's you against yourself. So who knows you better than you? And I'm sure you don't fight fair because you know your insecurities, you know your shortcomings, you know every pain point that you have. So when you're in a battle of you against yourself, you make a pretty compelling story for why you can't do something. Why? Because you have all of this history to back it up. And what happens is it starts to become crippling. So that's why it's called the crippling nature of self-doubt. That's what it is, because self-doubt never becomes less crippling. All that ends up happening is you narrow your vision. You're so focused on the worst outcomes and everyone else around you that you can't see yourself for who you are. Though the funniest thing is it never credits you for ever being the hero. You're always the villain. You're always the victim. You are not the hero in the realm of self-doubt. You're just there. That's really what it is. You are just a liability, and no one wants to be a liability. And within this concept, within looking at it, defining it, and knowing it, and being in battles of you against yourself and knowing your own history, I mean, there's stories in my life that I think about. It's so funny. I remember when I was about like 13 to 14 years old, I was in a drama club at school. We had a spring concert and they had decided that they were going to do a short little play within it. I had some speaking lines. And I remember when I had gotten there, I had never been in a room so filled before, at least at that point in time. I was like 13. And I remember standing up there and looking across the room, seeing all these people, seeing the seniors, and I was so nervous. I forgot my lines. I couldn't even make them up if I tried. And then I looked over and I saw the drama teacher, and the look on her face, I will never forget. It's permanently scarred into my mind. And she was just mouthing like, "What are you doing?" type of thing. And she had the craziest look on her face. She was so mad. And I just stood there and I was like, I don't even know what to do. So by the time I was done looking at her, freaking out and wondering what I'm doing, I kind of stood there and I ad-libbed something so I could basically get off the stage and get as far away from that place as humanly possible. And it was funny because I remember getting in the car and like my parents were there and my brother and sister were there. And I remember asking my mom, how did it go? And your parents are always so darn nice where it's like, oh, you did great. And I'm like, I didn't know any of the lines. That moment permanently sticks in my mind. So from the time I think I was about 16, I had such a hard time ever wanting to do like public speaking things because I had gotten so nervous about trying to remember lines. I didn't care so much about doing book presentations. That stuff seemed easy, but when it came to like memorizing and reciting things, I got so nervous and I convinced myself I just wasn't cut out for like drama club and different things like that. And honestly, looking back on that moment and seeing the way that I really reacted to that whole situation is I totally punished myself for not doing a good job, for not remembering my lines. So instead of giving myself some grace or cutting myself some slack or just being kind, instead I punished myself and I was like, okay, don't do that. Don't do drama club. You were horrible at that. That was one of the first bigger experiences of self-doubt where it was on a public display where it was like there was like a public humiliation to it. Anybody that's experienced a public humiliation, you do not want to experience that again. And so what happens is it's like you take those moments, you lock them away, and you add it to your history book that you're like, okay, well, we didn't do good there. So maybe anytime we ever go to do a school play again, like let's keep that locked and key in the back of our mind. But honestly, that is such a sad way to look at things. And I had to go through this little like period of time where I had to forgive myself, where I was like, you know what, Christina? You were 13. It was one of your first experiences. It flopped. It wasn't very good. And what's funny is now I look at it and I just kind of laugh and I'm just like, yeah, like you have some moments where you try things and they just don't work out. Like, you know, and sometimes no matter how hard you want things to go a particular way, sometimes it just doesn't work out. And then you have these moments in your life where it's not about like this public performance, like a school play getting on a stage. Instead, what happens is you get someone that comes into your life. They're a little bit more confident than you are. And then they kind of just make you question things that you had never had uncertainty about before. So like a perfect example is when I had become a new supervisor within this retail store I worked at, I remember a maintenance guy came in. Mind you, just a maintenance guy. I had never met this guy before in my life. He comes walking in. And I had gotten called up to the front and I started talking to him. After working in retail, you get really good at kind of like reading people and you just know when someone is like, okay, I don't even want to talk to you. So I'd gone up to talk to this maintenance guy. And as soon as I got there, they're like, I'm looking for someone in charge. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a supervisor. What do you need? Like, what do you want? Type of thing. He was like, well, like someone called and said a machine's not working. I'm here to fix it or whatever. And then it just was this incessant, like, where's the manager? I want to talk to the manager, which is funny because supervisors were like equivalent to like assistant store managers at that point in time. And so he just got to this point. He was so insistent that I was like, you know what? I don't even want to deal with you. Like, if I don't have to talk to you, that's great. Why do I even want to bother? Where it's funny because there was other supervisors in the store that are like, oh, I'll make you listen to me because you're not gonna walk all over me type of thing. And so finally talking to him and realizing, I'm like, you know what? This guy is gonna be such a nightmare to deal with that I was like, you know what? I am gonna just pass this off to the manager. So I ended up passing off this maintenance guy to the manager who happened to be a guy. And it was just one of those moments where after he had like walked away, he'd come back into the store. And a lot of times what would happen is different people in management, we would like tag team and do things. So like if you happen to talk to a maintenance guy the first time, maybe I would talk to him the second time because if they were busy doing something. So this guy comes in and I tried to close out what he was doing. And it was like, no. Get me the guy manager. I want to talk to him again. But what ends up happening is when you have experiences like that, they start to kind of like a little like nipping, kind of like a dog, like a chihuahua who nips at your ankles. That guy kind of just was like nipping at my confidence where I'm like, I know everything I need to know about this store. I might not know everything I need to know about machines, but that was like a moment where it's like a small challenging moment where you're like, ooh, am I going to kind of like let this guy bother me or get like the best of me? And once again, that's where like the self-doubt thing comes in where I'm like, it's kind of funny how I'm like, you don't always need something big to throw you off your game. It could just be something so small. And in that instance, that maintenance guy, it was such a irrelevant thing, him coming in, but it was just enough to kind of knock that like self-doubt into you that you're like, do I actually know what I'm doing? Am I actually doing something good? Like, or whatever the case is. And then what happens from there is it just starts to build upon itself because once again, then it starts going back to your history. And then next thing you know, you're going all the way back to when you're 13 and you're like, I forgot all my lines in a school play. But that's where you don't fight fair with yourself, where all of a sudden you're like, okay, but I thought we settled that. Like, I thought we chalked that up to like it was your first time being in a school play and things happen. Then you get to these moments where you're 22 and it's the first time you've ever been a supervisor. So maybe this is the first time you've ever come across a guy like this. Whereas now being in my later 20s, I realize I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to let this guy rattle me. I'm not going to let this guy get under my skin. And all that ends up happening is I'm either going to pass him off because I don't want to have to deal with them, or honestly, he's going to have to suck it up and deal with me. Because one of the other things I've started to notice is not every problem you run into is your problem. Sometimes it's someone else's problem. So clearly in that instance, running into it with the maintenance guy, it was a him problem. That was not a me problem. I knew that story inside and out. I could have easily helped him with whatever he needed, but for whatever reason, he didn't want to have to deal with me. And instead, I internalized it and created it to be this self-doubt narrative when really, if I was going to go at it today, I'd be just like, listen, you're either going to have to deal with me or you're going to have to get over it, because those are the only options that we have. In my opinion, those are like the perfect stories where it's like the first one is you're young, you're not used to being in like a public setting. And it's just funny because in the second one, it's just like this random person coming out of nowhere trying to throw you off a little bit. But then what's so funny is this third story, when I first started working at this retail store, the one I eventually became a supervisor at. When I first started, I was about 20. And let's just say I couldn't make a decision at all. And when I would be working on the floor and you'd have like certain moments where you kind of needed to make a decision, one of the things I had realized in my early 20s is it's like I had decision paralysis where it's like I'd kind of just freeze because it was like, oh my God, if I do this, 3 more things are going to happen. And I was terrified. I was terrified of making the wrong decision. That was always ultimately what the problem was. And I remember that store manager sat me down and he goes, you can't make a decision. He goes, I would really like for you to make a decision. And he even did this thing where it's like, I'm empowering you to make a decision. But the thing is, even though he empowered me to make a decision, even though he said it's okay to make the wrong decision, that didn't mean the self-doubt went away. I mean, it gave me permission that I'm like, okay, well, if I mess up, I'm going to say you told me that it was okay if I mess up. But the thing is, even when I made my first decision, a part of me on the inside was crying out like, what if this is wrong? Because it was still there. That voice was still there. It didn't go away. And then what happens is the more that you try to lean away from the self-doubt, because obviously we talked, it's a lack of confidence. But my biggest question is, how do you get to confidence if you don't have it? And that's where you have to go to the root. And it has to do with trust. You have to find a way to trust yourself so that you have confidence so that you can make decisions. So in this moment, when it's like the manager's like, I would like for you to start making decisions, really, it's like, okay, yes, you empowered me, but that's not giving me the right kind of confidence that I need. Really, I need confidence in myself so that I can start making decisions. This way, even if it's the wrong decision, I still stand. Like, honestly, there's nothing I love more than finding someone who can double down on a decision that they've made. Now, I'm not talking about it in a way of where it's like being offensive or something. I'm talking about it in the sense of like someone that like is doing something that's maybe like not necessarily cool. Maybe it's like they're trying out a whole new funky style and you're like, oh my God, that is so not in style. And they're like, I don't care. I'm doubling down. I love this. And it's almost like they have no shame for whatever that something is that they're doing. Or it's one of those things that it's like someone's like, that's not going to work. And they double down. They're like, I'm going to do it. And somehow they make it work. There's just nothing I love more than people that double down and they're like, no, because it goes to this confidence of where it's like they know themselves so well. Like, I'm committed to this. And I think there's something really enthusiastic about that. So it goes back to this thing of where it's like, if you're lacking confidence, really it's trust. And I can say for certainty, I know I did not trust myself in my early 20s. Yeah, I trusted literally everybody else over myself. And I can say that with certainty because I know myself very well, that in those moments, if someone else had given me a solution to a problem, I would have been like, yes, that's it. And I would have gone with it. And I would have taken someone's word much higher than my own. And what's been so amazing is from the time I was 20 years old, working in that store, not being able to make any decisions, to now being 28, I can look at my life and I can say, oh my God, I am so different. I've changed so much because now I trust myself. I have the confidence that when I make a decision, even if it falls flat, I'm like, hey, it was what was right in the moment. So even if it doesn't work out, it was what was right to me in the moment. And that's what I had to go by. And a lot of times that's what happens when you're making decisions, or if you're in management positions and you have to do certain things, it's what is right in this situation. That there might be liabilities and things that happen, but how can I best minimize the impact of what's going to happen? When I had learned that lesson at 20, so by the time I became a supervisor at 22, I could make decisions. I didn't struggle with it as much. I mean, I told you about how the maintenance guy threw me for a loop a little bit. But that was an instance where, again, he threw me for a loop. It wasn't because I didn't have any confidence in myself. I had confidence. He just rattled it a little bit. By the time I started working in a startup, and as we started to add new product lines, and so that meant we would start having new departments, I remember there was this moment in time where there was an issue that we had experienced with one line of business, and it was going to happen again with this new line of business. And I was actually able to intervene and say, hey, make sure we do X, Y, and Z so this doesn't become an issue again. And I remember the CEO had found out and he goes, oh my goodness, we had such a big issue with this first line. Is this problem going to happen again? And the IT department said, no, Christina actually was able to fix that. That was such a full circle moment in my life because the old Christina would have had to ask everybody for permission before doing something because of self-doubt. Whereas the new Christina was like, no, I've made a decision. I know how to solve this problem. I'm going to solve this problem. And if for some reason this comes back to bite me in the butt, I stand by what I've done. That I'm like, I will take ownership. I can say, yes, I did that. I'm sorry. I screwed things up, but this is what was right in the moment. This was a problem I needed to solve. And in that moment, it worked out and it worked in my favor that it was like, yes, this was exactly the right decision. And a lot of times that's what happens when you're trying to have these leadership roles is you have to be willing to step out, make a decision and be confident in them. So I don't want to sugarcoat or so quickly gloss over this idea of self-doubt. Obviously, it's the lack of confidence. Like we had established that the best way to build confidence is you have to first establish trust with yourself. And so it leads to this next question. How do you establish trust with yourself? Because obviously, I gave you the full circle moments in my life of how I've done these things. But how does someone that's struggling with self-doubt go about building trust? And so the biggest thing I would say to focus on is one, it's the small moments that build towards momentum. So this is going to sound so stupid, but one of the ways that I started to build trust with myself is as I told myself I was going to do things, I made sure to fulfill those things. And sometimes the best way to build momentum is you have to make whatever the task is that you're trying to accomplish, you have to make it so small you can't possibly fail. And that is something they always say a lot of times with like building habits. You have to make it so small that it's almost like you can't necessarily like mess it up. And so one of the things I used to have to do, it's going to sound crazy, but like one of the things I used to say doing my laundry is I would give myself a deadline that it's like my laundry needs to be done by, if I started it in the morning, it has to be done by tonight. And what does that mean? I'm washing it, it's in the basket, and it's in my room. And then I would slowly start to build upon it where it was like, okay, I'm washing it, it's in my room, and it's folded. And it's folded, and then it's put away. Like, and it was things like that. And as you start to do, in that example, those are physical like exercises where it's like, as I'm doing it, I'm building trust within myself. But then you have these moments where you need to build trust with yourself, kind of similar in the way that you would build trust with a friend, where obviously, yes, it's doing the things that you say that you're going to do. And then there's the follow through. But then you have those moments with your friends where what do? You talk, you have honest conversations, you open up because then it builds connection within you. And so how do you talk to yourself? And so one of the biggest things I would do is I would journal, because a lot of times those ideas that are swirling in your head that it's like, I can't do this, I'll never be this, because sometimes you need to see them, you have to validate them, and they have to be heard so you can move forward. So if you keep having this swirling feeling that it's like, well, I messed up here before, writing it down, taking time to process it and to write it down, to focus on it, it's kind of like when you're driving in a car and there's this obstacle in front of you. Most people wouldn't just drive down this obstacle if you don't know what it is or how it's going to damage your car. What you do is you have to first acknowledge it. Okay, I see that it's there, but what do? Well, you would do one of the logical things. You'd either go around it, you'd either turn around. But the thing is, you know that it's there. So just like with the self-doubt, just like with the voices, just like all the negativity, it's there. You got to acknowledge it somehow. So with the journaling, you're writing it, you're putting it down, you're putting it on paper, you're acknowledging its existence. And then you get to validate it, where it's like, okay, I can see why you feel this way. And then it could be one of those things like, do we see that this is still true, or is this just a past experience that's just trying to eke forward? And then that's where it's like, it's the seeing, it's the hearing, and it's the validating. And then ultimately it's the moving forward from there, because it's a way of processing those feelings. And just because you did something in the past doesn't mean that has to be the patterns that you continue to move forward with today. And like I said, in my early 20s, I had a very hard time trusting myself or believing in myself. And by not acknowledging the self-doubt, I allowed it to consume me. It would drown me out. All I could hear in my head was, basically all of my shortcomings, my pressure points, and how I couldn't do things. But as soon as it's like I start writing things down, I started to evaluate them and really kind of look at them and to acknowledge the existence of them. I was then able to realize maybe this isn't what I think it is. Maybe this doesn't have the credibility that I think it necessarily has. And within all of this, it actually makes me think of the two wolves parable, where it's like there's two wolves and whatever you feed it is what grows. And so I always think about self-doubt and how it's like it feeds on your insecurities. It knows the worst of you and it uses it against you. So you have to talk to yourself. That's where it's like the journaling comes in, or it's kind of like even the pep talks. Like, I mean, I'm not going to lie, there's times where if I have to do something that I'm really nervous about, I'll whisper to myself, you got this, just keep going. Because believe it or not, talking to yourself and actually talking like positively to yourself will immensely improve what you think about yourself. And then over time, you'll start to realize it was those small moments that slowly starts to shape you, and it can rewire whatever you initially thought. And also, I forgot, I wanted to share this line that Happy said to Peter Parker in Spiderman Far From Home. So in this moment, Happy has found Peter. They're on one of Tony Stark's jets, and Happy just says to Peter, I don't think Tony would have done what he did if he didn't know you were going to be here after he was gone. Basically, Happy is acknowledging how Tony chose Peter and how Happy knew Tony better than most people and how it was really one of those things he wouldn't have picked you if there wasn't a reason for it. I think that's such a beautiful silver lining within the whole movie, where you get to really see all of Peter's self-doubt, and then you get to see how it's like this person he envisions as his mentor, Tony, could ultimately see what he was going to become. Even with this whole idea of self-doubt, is it doesn't have to consume you if you don't let it consume you. So let's move into my favorite thing here at Let's Unravel, trying to summarize this whole episode up into a single phrase. An episode in a phrase is doubt drowns us out. Yes, it rhymed. I can't help it sometimes. Anyways, all right, so without any further ado, let's move into our sticky thoughts that stick. So 1, doubt second guesses everything. Nothing is off limits. 2, what you feed grows. 3, doubt drowns us out. And last but certainly not least, gain confidence by building trust with yourself. So thanks for hanging out with me, and thank you for talking with me all about the crippling nature of self-doubt. So I would love to connect with you more. You can connect with us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Let's Unravel Pod. And don't forget, we are now on Facebook, Let's Unravel Podcast. If you enjoyed this week's episode of the podcast show in general, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Your comments and 5-star ratings go a very long way. Also, please don't forget to hit subscribe on YouTube and to follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to stay up to date on all new episodes. We release new episodes every single Thursday, and you are not going to want to miss a thing. Well, I guess it's that time of the episode to tell you my hot take. Is hot chocolate better than apple cider? I'm going to say yes, because hot chocolate seems to be more universal, whereas hot apple cider, I usually only ever want it in like the fall. And, hot chocolate, I can usually drink it year round. Yeah. So I'm sticking with hot chocolate. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Well, that's all. I'll talk to you later. Bye.